Welcome, everyone. Join me here on the Daily X tonight for a discussion on Bigfoot, Bigfoot ghosts, parasitic twins, and hopefully not Bigfoot ghosts of parasitic twins. These are just some of the headlines in today's world of science and unexplained phenomena. Thank you for joining me. So let's get right to it. We're going to be having a lot of Bigfoot discussions today. I did see a headline in the world of science. Tests show that if you had a twin that didn't survive, a certain percentage of people are born with twins that don't make it. This is always fascinating to me. For instance, there are there's parasitic twins. And conjoined twins, those are, like what they used to call Siamese twins. But a parasitic twin is, I believe, where one of the twins is fully dependent on the other twin. And often it's not a fully formed body. There's a famous example of a woman, I think in the 1900s, who basically just had two legs coming out. In addition to her own two legs, she had two additional legs growing from between her legs. There were famous pictures. She went on to be married and had children. So she had four legs, and the two middle legs were kind of like childlike legs, but there was no other, no other body attached to it. And sometimes these cases can go undetected for many years. And then somebody has a growth that they've always taken for granted, that they, on their body, didn't know what it was, and it turned, when they, on closer examination of it, they find pieces of it that show that it actually was an unidentified twin at birth. So these are some of the more interesting things in the world of science. So yeah, actually the young woman was called Myrtle Corbin. And she is the one who had, you can see a picture of her online, and she had the two legs that hang down in between her regular legs. But I guess other than that, she had a completely normal life. Okay, so let's move on to some of the news. This is from a website called The Week in Weird. Everybody loves weird, right? So this is a story called The Conjuring of Bigfoot, the forgotten case file detailing the time Lorraine Warren met Sasquatch in Tennessee. This is kind of a crazy story, and just even reading it, I think tends to, I'm not sure how people feel on Ed and Lorraine Warren. I know that they became pretty famous, and the Conjuring shows were based on their work. I mean, to me, I consider this a bunch of BS, but to the extent it's entertaining, who the heck knows, right? But anyways, so this stuff doesn't really add to Lorraine's credibility anyways. So she relates how earlier, when they were younger, working as investigators, so I guess they did this for a long time, they were doing something down in Tennessee, and they had been called down to, there were some people in a small town that said that Bigfoot was harassing them, and a Bigfoot had tried to take one of their 2-year-old children. I don't know how they spooked the Bigfoot because it didn't get the child. But in any case, this Bigfoot was apparently bothering people down there. So Lorraine was not really into that particular phenomena, but since they were down there, she decided to go out with the people on a look into the mountain area. This is an area of the Appalachian Mountains, which is always a fascinating area, great for putting stories. It's just because it's such a mysterious area that is so filled with these isolated communities that are stuck in their little areas out in the mountains. It's the isolation that makes them interesting. So anyways, apparently this is from this account. So and this was published, I guess, in one of their early books. On a foggy morning, just before embarking on a 4-day lecture tour, Ed and Lorraine headed to Tennessee. All right, that part I already told you. To visit the hill people that were frightened about this. Okay. So when Lorraine went out with the group, so hours later, it says, exhausted from Hours of hiking and frustrated with what felt like a waste of time before a busy lecture tour, Lorraine took a break near a tree. It's always convenient, these no one else is around or they're just far enough away. So while she's on a break, suddenly her mind flashed with a mental image of a large creature, a fusion of man and ape, is how she described it, with long arms and shaggy hair. Its face was like that of a caveman, but its eyes were kind and shone with intelligence. Lorraine knew it was Bigfoot. That sounds like that Bigfoot from the Harry and the Hendersons. Well, nobody younger than 50 part remembers that movie, but as she focused in on the being, she realized that this creature was just 40 feet from her, hiding in the thick brush, and he was in pain. Lorraine knew this because Bigfoot was telepathically speaking to her with his mind. He was hurt, the chapter reads. His hairy, splayed foot grabbed with still seeping blood. During his travels that day, he had somehow injured his foot. Afraid that the injury would keep him from returning to his secret cave. Everybody has a secret cave in these stories. The creature now projected great fear. Bigfoot missed his family. Aww. And fearing death or capture by the humans. Well, we never do capture these guys. Don't they know that? Because we don't have any evidence. So fearing that, he felt trapped and isolated. He was scared for his life. Lorraine began to send Sasquatch telepathic messages, explaining that he had terrified the settlement by attempting to kidnap one of their children. But Bigfoot shook his head, responding that he had only meant to make friends with the child. Youngsters don't have the prejudices of adults, the Bigfoot told her telepathically. So he felt that he could perhaps explain himself to the child, just as he was explaining himself to Lorraine. I guess we need equity for Bigfoot. Anyways, eager to help, Lorraine began to shake with anxiety as she hushed her hiking group. So I guess the group was still in the area. Anyway, oh yeah, but they couldn't see the Bigfoot, only she was aware of it. Needing complete concentration for her communication with Bigfoot, whom she felt a maternal love for. As she crept closer into the brush, projecting images of her bandaging Sasquatch's foot, she spoke softly to the beast, hoping to calm Bigfoot enough to approach him. I am coming to you, she mentally whispered. I will help you. I will be your friend. Suddenly, the sound of a bullhorn rang out, breaking her concentration and sending Bigfoot fleeing into the forest. A member of the group had honked the horn as a joke, startling Lorraine and frightening the Sasquatch. This is where it gets even weirder. Lorraine's mental images became frantic. The searing pain of Bigfoot's injury, almost too much to take. He was running as fast as he could, limping up a hill, shaking with fear and exhaustion. Then the projections disappeared. Bigfoot was gone. Lorraine spent the next 20 minutes following a trail of blood, both redder and more viscous than a human blood, she says. That's in quotes. That sounds a little weird, but she followed this blood trail to the edge of a cliff. No sign of creature could be found. And so the case file ends with an apparent Sasquatch suicide. All right, so if you're a paranormal investigator and you chase Bigfoot off a cliff, again, you're a paranormal investigator. Even if you didn't intend for him to go off the cliff, certainly now you know it's a big opportunity to prove his existence because you go and you find the body. Well, there's no mention of that here. But there is an interesting ending to this story. Ed Warren writes that it is his belief that Bigfoot is a Tupa. So is the Loch Ness Monster and many other, now you see it, now you don't, creatures that get reported to the press. So I'm going to go over this with some of the other Bigfoot articles that I'm coming up with. But it is kind of I am fascinated by the idea of tupas. Not that I believe that they're possible, but if you're gonna delve into the creative world, it does seem strange. Obviously Bigfoot. I mean, in the 1970s, when I was growing up, it seemed at least possible that there could be a family of Bigfoot out there, and we hadn't really got a good look at one or a photo of one. But at this point, everybody's got a cell phone. There's drones all over the place. There's, Google satellites searching. I mean, there's, nobody finds any evidence of Bigfoot in all this time. It just seems ridiculous. Unless there is some stranger phenomena going on, which some of which I'll get to later. But a Tupa is something that you create with your mind. And interestingly enough, I've talked before on some of these shows, the eminent psychologist, one of the pioneers of psychology, Carl Jung, his last book was on flying saucers. And one of his more powerful beliefs that he had to be careful about how to explain, because he didn't want to be rejected by mainstream science. But he explained how, for instance, flying saucers were a projection of the unconscious mind, but at the same time, that projection could take physical form. In other words, it could show up in reality, or you could take a photo of it. So some of those photos of flying saucers that are out there could actually be projections of mind, according to Jung, who was a genius. Now, I'm not saying that I believe in that. I'm not saying it's true. But the world is an unusual place. So we've talked about that before with some of the stuff that was discovered that goes to the heart of reality in quantum physics, in particular, the double slit light experiment that was first done, I think, in the 1920s, and is still not explained, and goes to the fundamental aspect of reality and how it seems to be that nothing is real until an observer actually goes to the act of observing it. No one knows what that means. Many physicists debate it. Some people just try to ignore it, but it still remains unexplained. So anyways, this article was in Week in Weird. Check it out. And I'll also put a link to it on the website. All right, so this next one was kind of entertaining. British Bigfoot. Communities of ape-like humanoids dwell in the UK, says expert. This is in a place called Weird Science News. All right. There was a story of children chased out of a forest by a hairy ape man. One of them fell and noticed the creature stopped the chase as soon as it fell. It just looked at them. Similarly, a group of youngsters were chased through a woodland near Sheffield by a 6-foot-tall figure with red eyes. So British Bigfoot is only 6 feet tall. Interesting. The British are very sophisticated. I think maybe their Bigfoots are more sophisticated. Maybe they even have kind of British accents. McGrath, who authored the book Beasts of Britain, is part of a small group of Bigfoot researchers in the UK. He and his colleagues investigated alleged sightings of aggressive ape-like men, mysterious footprints, children running for their lives through the woodlands, and the sounds of trees crashing down as eerie groans echoed across the field. These incidents allowed them to form a rough idea of what British Bigfoot might look like. According to McGrath, the creature is no more than 6 feet tall, is more human-like than the US version. It has a wide jutting jaw and brows, a low forehead, and arched feet. So it does sound more sophisticated than American Bigfoot, which makes more sense because the British are more sophisticated. So their primitive monsters are a little more human than ours. Very convenient. History of the British Bigfoot is related to the legend of the Green Man, he said, which is a hairy man-like creature depicted in ancient art as a human face surrounded by leaves and represents the life cycle of the forest. It is found in cultures all across Europe, particularly in Germany and France. Yeah, the Green Man is a pretty cool part of culture out there, representing that kind of pagan idea of a kind of forest spirit that is venerated when you depend on green growth, whether it's in a forest or on a farm. So, it makes sense that that kind of a god would be green. So next up we have This is also from Week and Weird. This one says Bigfoot is a ghost, interdimensional Sasquatch, the green flash, and why we'll never find a body. And this story actually reminds me of something that after I go through this article, I'll go through what I'm going to call a true story, but it was, I didn't witness it. These were guys that I knew that told me this story. And this, some reason where for some reason, and when I explain the story, I'll explain why, that there is a little bit of credibility to that. These guys having seen something in Auburn, Massachusetts. Anyway, so let's go to Bigfoot is a ghost. Again, this is in Week and Weird. All right. So again, he says, so despite all the evidence, all the TV shows now that have all kinds, that have all kinds of teams going out hunting Bigfoot over the years, and anything for any kind of evidence thing, nobody ever gets anything good. And every time they find what, pieces of fur or pieces of animal dung or whatever, it always ends up being some other animal. So there's just never any good solid evidence seems to emerge. So he says, there's some cool stuff in this story though. So as a paranormal investigator who doesn't confine himself to one facet of the unexplained, he's in the position to notice crossover phenomena. This goes on in the world of UFOs too, where the behavior of these things or the accounts of these experiences are way stranger than you would expect if you were just coming across an undiscovered creature like a Bigfoot, or you were just witnessing a UFO, which was just a spaceship arriving from another galaxy. The stories that emerge end up being so strange that a lot of times that they have a dreamlike quality, like something that's all where reality is all jumbled and mixed up. So that's an interesting aspect to this. So these crossover phenomena exist between reports of all manner of, all right, yeah. So it's like I said, so people follow these long, all right, so investigating frequently find long swats of Bigfoot tracks that often stop in the middle of nowhere. So must be a ghost, right? Something that disappears, or it gets picked up by an alien ship or Men in Black helicopter, I don't know. Strange electronic malfunctions plague researchers during critical moments. This is, we've seen that in UFO movies, but apparently this happens in Bigfoot stuff too. And of course, photos of the creature are nearly always blurred. All right. He talks about a few different people that he went out with, but there was one interesting group, and this was a couple of Appalachian guys named Dallas and Wayne, who, okay, I think this was in Virginia or West Virginia. So Dallas is a Reiki master with a thick Southern accent. He believed that Bigfoot existed between the worlds and used portals to pop in and out of our realm. His office was lined with thousands of pixelated photographs that he claimed contained the creature. And perhaps most startlingly, he claimed that Bigfoot had telepathically taught him. This is cool. So Bigfoot telepathically taught Dallas a sacred language that could summon the Sasquatch. That's a pretty cool skill to have. So so apparently these guys take researchers out. Now, I don't know if they charge for this or not. Excuse me while I take another drink. So Dallas, so this paranormal researcher that writes this article went out with Dallas, and Dallas was compelled by greater forces to pass on the so-called Bigfoot language to this researcher, a woman. So he taught her the series of sacred words, making her promise to use them only for good. That night, she put them to use around the campfire, and something very strange occurred. As we listened to the echo of her voice bounce through the nearby mountains, I guess with the language of the Bigfoot, we all gasped as we watched a bright green flash illuminate the sky above, like a meteor entering the atmosphere, which is probably what it was. But we barely had time to respond to the mysterious light before massive booming shrieks came thundering from the forest, first from one side of the campfire, then from the other. Whatever was making these noises, there were several of them, and they were closing in. Well, I mean, if these paranormal investigators that went out with Dallas and Wayne were not in on it, then they could have been being hoaxed by Dallas and Wayne, who had some compadres out in the woods ready to bring them in on the joke. That seems like the most likely explanation, not to be overly cynical about things, but so frankly, he says, frankly, I was terrified. We all were. None of us had ever heard anything like it before. And after spending an afternoon listening to Dallas and Wayne fill our heads with tales about telepathic communication, trans-dimensional entities, and portals to prehistoric worlds, we hadn't exactly remained open-minded. But when the strange noises echoed through the forest, we short-circuited. And while Dallas and Wayne positioned their cameras, they looked at us and laughed. Sorry, the TV came on. This was a response they'd experienced a lot. So they were used to taking guys out in the woods, teaching them that language, and then having Bigfoot show up out in the woods, or at least enough to make some noises. So that's convenient. So for the next 2 hours, we huddled around the fire as the howls continued. Occasionally, small rocks were tossed at us from the trees. And once the sound of something very big charging in our direction from the tree line, only for Wayne to stand up from his chair and run toward it, sending it rushing back into the forest. Maybe that was a British Bigfoot and they frightened easily. If this had been a setup, it was a good one, too good for any of us to believe a couple of Bigfoot hunters from a depressed coal mining town could stage with any believability. How hard was it to set it up? Just got to throw a couple of buddies out there, give them a bottle of moonshine and let them know in the middle of the night to come howling in. I don't know. Anyways, it's a good story, but the green flash part is also interesting. So, because it seems to be, this is what this researcher is kind of talking about, how it seems to be a fairly common phenomena, both for UFO watchers or Bigfoot seers or ghost sightings too, apparently it says. I mean, I definitely think that I can see where if you're out camping, the sky is wide open and it's fascinating to just, instead of being in the city where you can barely see it, you're out there and you're not distracted and you're looking at the sky. And it's just, you got this expanse of sky and it's beautiful. And so when you're watching that, you got a much better chance of seeing the flash of a meteor. So both UFO watchers are obviously out watching the sky, but also Bigfoot watchers, because they're just camping. So it's natural to be looking at the sky, especially at night when you're not going to be looking at the woods. So let's see if there's anything more interesting in here in this particular article. I don't see much here, but it does bring up an interesting. I don't think that Bigfoot is a ghost. I think Bigfoot is just something that we want to see, and then stories get kind of exaggerated. But if Bigfoot is real, I suppose it makes more sense, since nobody's got a photo of him at this point, that he does have some other different kind of either comes from a different reality or is a projection, like Ed Warren suggested, or something more unusual than regular science would think about. So lastly, Jane Goodall talks about Bigfoot. Remember Jane Goodall? She's still around. She's the one that lives out with, I forget if she lived with I think she lived with the chimpanzees, but I'm not sure. There's one of these famous British women studied the chimpanzees, and another one I think studied the gorillas. Forget which one she is, but in an interview with GQ, she talks about Bigfoot. She says that many hunters have told her that they've experienced monkeys without tails. They walk upright and they're about 6 foot tall. So are the British Bigfoot. I'm not sure where she, This was in Ecuador. So the Ecuador Bigfoot is only 6 foot tall, just like the British Bigfoot. So Ecuador has some very sophisticated Bigfoot, presumably. Let's see. She says, so I don't know if it's perhaps a myth that stems from maybe the last of the Neanderthals, but then is the last of the Neanderthals still living in these remote forests? So that's kind of interesting. So she is open to the idea that Neanderthals live in the forest, but Neanderthals are not Bigfoot, or at least not the American Bigfoot, the big bad boy that we're used to, that's like, I don't know, 7 or 8 feet tall. Neanderthals were stronger than humans, but I don't think they were Homo sapiens. Neanderthals are a type of human, but Neanderthals, compared to Homo sapiens, I believe they were more muscular and had bigger brains, but they were not taller, to my knowledge. Maybe a little bit, I don't know. So they might have had more primitive features. So they asked the article, in the interview, they asked her, could Neanderthal still be living in Ecuador or Washington State or Australia? I wonder if she's Australian. Maybe I thought she was British. Well, anyways, she says, I don't know, but I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. And I'm not going to say people believe in it are stupid. So she's got an open mind to it. Anyways, which is pretty cool. And before I let you go, I'll click on Mysterious Universe and see if there's any other. All right, it looks like some interesting stuff we can talk about tomorrow. There's a headline, The Bizarre Tale of the Northport Devils. I'm not sure where Northport is, but it's pretty cool to talk about devils. Another headline up there is The Weird Life of a Paranormal Investigator. Beyond the Strange, I'm going to click on it to see the rest. Oh, just Beyond the Strange, that's what it is. So The Weird Life of a Paranormal Investigator Beyond the Strange. And that's with Nick Redfern, who's a pretty famous author of books on the weird and stuff like that. I think he tries to take a somewhat scientific approach to it as much as he can and still make money. Let's see, there's also Large Mysterious Cat captured on CCTV in Wales. There's something about England, they always have those big cat sightings, which I think they're probably real. I don't think it's anything supernatural or mysterious. I think just once upon a time, a lot of British people could afford to bring those kind of things home and raise them. And then at some point they get to a certain size, you let them out. And there could even be a population that has managed to survive there, just enough of them. And let's see. And that looks to be about. There's another thing, the Chad Pirate Demon. I don't know what that is. And finally, and maybe we'll do some alien stuff tomorrow. There's an article here. Scientists identify 2 galaxies that could be home to hyper advanced alien civilizations. That sounds interesting. So let's check back tomorrow and see if any of these turn out to be interesting stories. With that, I wish you all a very good night.